In this video, I'm going to share 4 of my favorite Fujifilm simulations. This camera is the X100VI. The X100 line is a fantastic pick-upable line of cameras, but the film simulations is one of the reasons, in my opinion, they've become so popular. So let's just jump straight in. The first recipe I'm using is a Kodak 200 film emulation. A very quick disclaimer, I've obviously sourced a lot of these recipes from kind of various places online, different looks and styles that I personally love. A lot of them actually got from a website called Fuji Weekly. That will be linked down below. I've obviously tweaked things where I found preference to do that, but I will link, where relevant, the kind of original sources for each recipe down below in the description. So I always kick off by sharing some sample images shot with that particular film emulation, so you can kind of see the style and the look that you might get with one of these images. Obviously, it's going to look quite different depending on the light and obviously the exposure settings that you use as well. But this is just a really fantastic, slightly stylistic, like you do want a kind of a nice base style out of these images, and I think the Kodak 200 just looks super clean while still looking quite filmic. So on the IQ section up here, you can obviously see that it is based on the classic negative film simulation. So obviously you do need normally a film simulation to actually base these off. So that is the setting there. We go to grain effect. The setting that I've got is strong large. The color chrome effect is going to be strong. The color chrome FX blue also strong. Turn off smooth skin effect. White balance on this setting I actually have set to auto, and some of my film emulation settings I change this or like kind of specify it. For instance, like in low light, I actually personally feel like an auto white balance is a more productive setting than kind of randomly setting a Kelvin, because sometimes that can just look absolutely shocking. So for this one, this is auto. The dynamic range I leave at 100 for this particular setting. Dynamic range priority I leave to off. On the tone curve, I have it set to highlights -2 and then shadows +1. Color is +4, sharpness at 0. High ISO noise reduction at -2, clarity -4. And then long exposure noise reduction off. And if you've previously seen my setup video for my X100VI, I use each of the dials, the manual dials on the front and the back, to control both the shutter speed and the ISO. And this film emulation setting, the Kodak 200, is probably my almost like my go-to, a bit like kind of a lot of people just use the standard classic chrome. That is my almost like out and about, I just want everything to kind of look generally good. That's that preset I use for that. A very quick note for anyone that doesn't actually know about this: the easiest way to actually change your film simulation on the Fuji system is through the Q menu. So you can very quickly just press the Q menu, and on my camera here, I've got this set up to the first selection. I'm not actually sure, I have to admit, whether this is a Fuji X100VI feature that by default the selection kind of custom menu is there to start with. So as you can see, just with my scrolly wheel on the back of this camera here, I can actually cycle through 1, 2, 3, 4 just like that. If that doesn't come up as an option on your camera, just press and hold the Q button, and then this obviously brings you the area to be able to actually select that specific thing in the menu. So you can go down to any of these and you can change it to allow you to change your film simulation settings. Option number 2, I have a Lomo 800 film recipe. The Lomo 800 is a very versatile daylight preset. I use it all the time in sunsets, but it's also a really nice way of slightly softening the blues that you get out of that classic chrome profile. Everyone knows that it can be very, very punchy in the highlights of the blue, and this is just a really nice way to kind of soften that up. I use it in a variety of daylight situations. I tend to steer clear of this in low light because the fixed white balance can look a bit janky and a bit strange, as you'll see in the settings now. So for the Lomo settings, this one is actually based on a classic chrome, which is of course one of the most popular default settings on the Fujifilm system. The grain effect is weak and large. The color chrome effect is strong. The color chrome FX blue effect is off. The smooth skin effect. White balance I have set to 6000 Kelvin. So this is obviously to roughly emulate the film stock itself. Like I said, that's one of those areas where on the Kodak 200, I like it to be auto, because that's almost like the recipe that I like to use almost for everything. Like kind of like just if I'm wanting to shoot and I want it to look good straight out the JPEGs, I'll shoot that. Lomo 800 is a little bit more stylistic. I use it for sunsets and that type of thing. The dynamic range I have set to 100 still. Dynamic range priority off. Tone curve is 0, 0, so highlights and shadows both at 0. The colors are +4. The sharpness is -4. The high ISO noise reduction down at -4 for this one, clarity at 0, and long exposure noise reduction actually on. Next up is a Portra 400 emulation. You can actually see the difference between the Portra 400. This is a Cuban negative shot, and then here is the Portra 400 style, so that will kind of give you an idea of what this is actually doing to the images. You can, if you want to, soften this one up and make the blues even sort of slightly whiter. This is kind of a preference thing that I have this a little bit closer to a classic chrome than probably would be actually for a Portra 400 kind of accurate film emulation style, but it still looks good in my opinion. So I've selected C3 within my custom menu. That's my Portra 400 setting. So let's head into the IQ menu again. Scroll right up to the top. You can see that this is also a classic chrome emulation. We have the grain effect this time set to weak, small. The color chrome effect at strong. The color chrome FX blue off, smooth skin effect off with this one as well. The white balance is sat at daylight for this one. So again, it's going to be a film emulation that I use predominantly in the day to actually make that fit. I tend to pretty much never use this in low light, for instance. The dynamic range optimization is at 200 for this one. The D range priority off. Highlights at 0 and shadows at -2 on the tone curve. Color at +2. Sharpness -2 for this one. High ISO noise reduction -4. Clarity 0, and long exposure noise reduction on. This camera is getting so hot. Like, it is very, very warm in France right now, but my God, like, this camera is off and not taking any photos. It shouldn't actually be like borderline overheating. So it's tearing through battery, even already going on through the settings page. Pretty crazy. Right, so for the last film stock, we're going to turn on, this is Cuban negative film recipe, and this is predominantly my low light. So I tend to play around, I'll play around with those other settings if the kind of low light environment that I'm working with just doesn't work with this Cuban negative film emulation, but this is something which I kind of really like to shoot with in low light. After me going on about how I use this in low light, I realized I don't actually have that many low light photos to share, but here's a few taken. These were with flash, but it will kind of give you an idea. I also do use this in daylight, but this is even more stylistic. Like, it does look really nice in my opinion, but it is quite a stylized image. So here is the Cuban negative settings. So first of all, you can see that the film simulation itself is again a classic chrome. So I actually really like kind of a base classic chrome, but it's just way too huey into the blues for me right away. For instance, like you take a photo of a sunset or maybe like a sky with classic chrome on, and it just shoots out like a cyan. So that's why I always like to customize it a bit. The grain effect is strong large. The color chrome effect is strong. Color chrome FX blue, strong. Smooth skin effect off. White balance auto, as discussed. Like, I like to, because I use this predominantly for low light, it just basically gives me the most kind of likelihood that it's going to get a good shot on a white balance auto. Dynamic range 200. Dynamic range priority off. Tone curve, the highlights are -2. And the shadows are +1. Again, helpful in those lower light environments. Color is +4, sharpness at 0. High ISO noise reduction, -2. Clarity, -4. And the long exposure noise reduction off. And so that kind of ties up the film recipes for the X100V. Those are the ones that I've been using most likely. Just before I move on from this, I love these Peak Design wrist straps. I use Peak Design for all of my camera straps, and like just having that as an option, I can just carry around like this. Super, super useful. If you have a little carry around camera like this, which you do a lot of traveling, certainly in certain countries now as well, like it gets pretty problematic, the amount of camera snatches and phone snatches going on. Like I know in London, you do have to be really careful. So this, thoroughly recommend it. I'll link this down below if you guys are interested. But hopefully you have found this video interesting and helpful. I shared the community post a couple of days ago, so I really wanted to just share the settings in case any of you guys have a Fujifilm camera or are thinking about getting a Fujifilm camera, so hopefully this one can help you out.